Hey, guys! It is believed that the USA has the best medicine in the world. It is quite possible that this is true, but not every American can be convinced of this. Even the happy owners of medical insurance can't afford either preventive care or treatment, as a rule. Today we will look at the story of a young immigrant couple from Russia and their experience in receiving medical care in the United States. But before we start, subscribe to our channel, like and share the video on social networks. Next, we will tell you why medicine in America is either for the very poor or for the very rich. So, I start the story on behalf of this girl. For obvious reasons, her name will remain confidential.
I will tell you two stories that happened to me and my husband. In August 2016 we moved to America from Moscow, and in October I woke up at night with a monstrous pain in my back and leg. In the morning, my husband pushed me into the back seat of the car like a long, inflexible object I couldn't even sit up and took me to the doctor. He prescribed powerful opiates and informed me that I needed an MRI and most likely spinal surgery. I started taking the pills with hope, but they didn't help. My consciousness began to swim, and the pain didn't diminish. So I gave up opiates, seeing no point in them, and, despite the terrible agony, began to study the terms of the health insurance we had managed to buy. I found that we had to pay for the MRI, and the cost ranged from $2,500 to $5,000 for a single MRI. From $2,500 to $5,000 per scan, and there was no way to know the price in advance, only after the fact, when they billed us. This money seemed absolutely crazy to me, and I told my husband that I would not do MRI. Moreover, I already knew that I most likely have a pinched nerve, and, strange as it may seem, in the vast majority of cases it goes away by itself, so that both expensive research and surgery are useless. But it was hard to bear. Almost every day I wanted to throw myself out of the window. I spent my days lying on my stomach because I could not move, sit or stand. My husband heroically took care of me, washed me in the shower and took me to physical therapy, where I was stretched like on a rack, electrocuted and twisted in different directions. I even went to a chiropractor, which I don't believe in. Eventually I came to the realization that my only hope was a clinic in Minnesota, where pain like mine is treated with heavy exercise on special high-tech machines. My husband and I set out to buy a car in which to transport me halfway across the country. At the car dealer's office, I lay under the table on a yoga mat and counted my money. People passing by would stop and, when they heard what was wrong with me, tell me how their aunt had the exact same thing and had to have 5 surgeries before she could drive again. Such stories certainly didn't add to the optimism. We bought an SUV, the back seats of which folded down so that a large flat surface was created, and you could put a person in it. What if I have to brake hard and I go through the windshield? We thought. So we bought a climbing harness. After putting it on, I lay down, my husband fastened me to the carabiners with straps, and we hit the road. Those 3 days on the road were probably the worst of the whole time. The pain seemed unbearable. At night we stayed in hotels, but we didn't sleep because I was moaning infernally most of the time. It was impossible to keep quiet. Finally, we arrived in Minnesota and settled into a rented apartment for 3 months in the city of St. Paul on the banks of the Mississippi. Did you know that Minneapolis and St. Paul are called twin cities? They merge into one another to make one big metropolis. Twice a week, my husband drove me to classes at the clinic. The first one lasted only a few minutes. I had to sit in the machine and pump certain muscles, but I couldn't sit. Tears spurted from my eyes like clowns in a circus. Little by little, however, the duration of the exercise sessions increased, and within 3 months my pain level had decreased by about half. This was gigantic progress because I started walking and sitting. We celebrated a memorable occasion with dinner at a restaurant, the first time I had eaten in a restaurant in a long time. Before that, I had eaten almost exclusively lying on my stomach. And after a while I got on a plane and flew to Moscow. There I did an MRI, for 4,000 rubles or $52, which showed a herniated intervertebral disc, and went to see a brilliant neurosurgeon. I must say that at that moment I was a convinced opponent of surgery, as I had already read several books on the subject, and they all said, only conservative therapy. However, the doctor told me that surgery is required in about a quarter of patients with hernias, and I, unfortunately, fell into these 25%. Without surgery, I would lose some of the functions of my leg in a few years. Just a few days later he operated on me in a private clinic equipped with the latest technology, and after anesthesia I woke up a new person without any hint of pain. Together with the tests, 2 days in the ward, anesthesia, etc., the intervention cost me $2,500. as much as it costs in America just one scan on an MRI machine. And now for the second story, the scarier one. Around the time when I had the surgery, my husband decided to resume karate classes. And he did not calculate his strength. He began to train too intensively after a multi-year break. When he returned from another training session, he found that he could not move and almost got hit by a car. And when, after a couple or 3 weeks, joint mobility was restored and muscle pain went away, it turned out that his leg was twitching uncontrollably, his arm was spasming, and there were some strange special effects in front of his eyes. The two of us went through a lot of medical literature on sports injuries and came to the conclusion that in a few months everything would go away on its own. Sometimes I still offered my husband to go to the doctor, but he refused, remembering my adventures. He still had to do it, because even after 6 months it didn't get better. My husband went to see a neurologist, who informed him that his symptoms were not related to karate, as it was the typical onset of multiple sclerosis. But to confirm the diagnosis, you need to do an MRI, and 2 or better 3 scans at once, of the brain, as well as 2 parts of the spinal cord. $2,500 times 3, and you get My husband was outraged and said that even if he had extra money, he wouldn't spend it, because it's stupid to throw it away. After all, we all know how much an MRI actually costs, $52. However, we were not ready to go to Russia, so I decided that I should get a second opinion. Little did one doctor say, what if he's crazy or had a bad education? I booked my husband in for a consultation at one of the world's best multiple sclerosis diagnosis and treatment centers, the Weill Cornell Multiple Sclerosis Center. Dr. Susan Gauthier, one of the best specialists, examined him long and very carefully, tapped him with a hammer, pinched him, even examined the soles of his sneakers, and in the end she said the same thing. It's multiple sclerosis, 99%, and 15 years ago, when MRI machines were scarce, my husband would have been prescribed medication based on symptoms alone. But they don't do that now, so you have to get an MRI. We went back to the same place. And lived for another 6 whole months trying to come to terms with an almost inevitable future. Multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease that, even with intensive therapy, sometimes progresses so quickly that within a few years a person loses the ability to move and breathe. Therapy in the United States costs from $60,000 to $100,000 a year. Of course, insurance pays some of it, but not all of it, and we didn't understand how to live with it. I was reminded of the story of a famous director I once talked to at a party in Moscow. He had worked very successfully in Hollywood, and then suddenly returned to Russia. Why? I inquired. The director replied that he had been diagnosed with a chronic disease. In Russia they treat it for free, but in America he couldn't afford treatment. My husband and I talked about the fact that perhaps the same thing was waiting for us. But I kept looking for a solution, and one day, by some miracle, I found a clinic in New Jersey where MRI scans are done for cash for those who don't have health insurance. They asked $1,100 for 2 scans with injection of a contrast agent into the vein, of course, not like in Moscow, but this amount was more or less acceptable and, importantly, agreed in advance. The scans themselves were given to us, and the transcripts were sent to the attending physician. And then Dr. Gauthier calls us and says the following phrase: I have 2 pieces of news, good and bad. Good news, it's not MS. Bad news, I need a neurosurgical consult. In a panic, I sent the scans to the doctor in Moscow, and he asked me to call him back urgently. And he started like this: how can I tell you? It's better not to postpone the operation. He didn't want to scare us. Later we learned that my husband could theoretically be paralyzed at any second, and he had lived all that year without knowing it. 3 days later we were in Moscow, and my husband was lying on the operating table in the same clinic where I had been operated on a year ago. Joking that we have some kind of strange family contract for spinal surgery, Kashiv cut his neck and replaced 2 intervertebral discs with implants. Of course, from all of the above, one might conclude that we are just fools. Why put off first one thing, then another, risking our health? Then I will ask a question. Who wouldn't save, taking into account these astronomical prices? Only those for whom a few $1,000s means nothing at all, and there are very few such people. Most Americans are suffering exactly as much as we are from this system in which the average person can't afford basic things. In 2019, all American newspapers were abuzz with news about a Boston resident who had her leg pinned between a train and the platform. When eyewitnesses tried to call an ambulance, she started begging them not to do it. She couldn't afford to pay for it, although she had health insurance, just like us. Now I'll tell you why it's all set up the way it is in general terms, so as not to bore you with the details. For example, why such inflated, obscene sums are asked here for any, even minor procedures. The fact is that these prices not in each specific case, but in general are not designed to be paid in full. When a hospital or a doctor or a lab puts out a bill, they know in advance that the insurance company will try to lower it and pay only a small part of it. Those are the rules of the game. The hospital or doctor or lab will try, in turn, to prevent the insurer from doing so. American colleges graduate tens of thousands of people every year trained to do just that. Fight either on the side of the insurance company or the medical businesses with insurance codes assigned to each procedure. The businesses inflate the price and the insurers discount it, and the salaries of all this giant army manipulating the codes end up included in the price of medical services, too. But there is a paradoxical situation. If a person does not have health insurance, he is billed the same inflated prices. Only he has no way to lower them, because he's not a giant corporation. And for that reason, people are discharged from hospitals, finding themselves owing, for example, $500,000. I was struck by a guy's story I read in 2019. He was 18, renting an apartment with 2 friends, and working while going to college. He didn't have insurance because he didn't have any money. Well, why would a young healthy man need it anyway? One day he passed out on the street. Passers-by called an ambulance, which took him to the hospital. It turned out that the guy had some rare disease in which a person periodically faints. When he regained consciousness, he already owed several $100,000. As a result, this very young man did not go to school, and the next 10 years worked only to pay the bills. And he fainted regularly, but he had gotten used to feeling their approach and hit it home at that time, so as not to faint in the street, and that passers-by did not call an ambulance again. Because he still couldn't afford insurance. I can't remember where I read this story, so I can't confirm it with a link, but articles about how medical bills ruin lives come out all the time and in huge numbers. Not everyone does what this guy did. Many choose to go through bankruptcy because they realize they will never be able to pay it off at all, ever. Giant medical bills are the most common cause of bankruptcy for individuals in the United States. If you're wondering just how much this very insurance costs, the numbers are roughly as follows. $500 a month for one person is considered cheap. For this money you are entitled to almost nothing. One checkup a year at the therapist, the simplest tests, EKG and physical examination, and one gynecologist appointment a year for women. You pay for everything else until you reach a certain amount, which is called deductible. If you spend more than that amount in a calendar year, then the insurance will kick in and pay a portion of what's over that amount, for example, 80%. Deductible is usually $7,500 per person, and in practice it means that unless you have a serious illness, you pay for medical services out of your own pocket. Essentially, you only need this insurance in case of an unforeseen catastrophe like what happened to that guy. Oh yeah, the regular insurance plan doesn't include eyes and teeth. You have to buy a separate insurance product for those organs or pay for their treatment yourself. But that's not all. This very health insurance, which costs a lot of money, is not so easy to buy. You can do it only in a certain period, usually from November 1st to December 15th. At other times, they will make an exception for you only under certain circumstances. Someone died, someone was born, you just moved to the US.
Guys, if you liked our video, but you haven't subscribed to us yet, subscribe right now and post the video on social networks. There will be a lot of interesting things in the next episodes. See you soon. Bye.